In the previous tutorial we saw the marquee selection tools. And marquee selection tools are ideal for certain situations. But let's take this image that we have in front of us where I've got a potted plant, a jar of honey, and also some kind of candle type element here as well. If I want to select these different elements in Photoshop, I'm going to have difficulty doing it with the marquee selection tool because of its very nature. It's very uniform, very either rectangular or circular in form. So these shapes don't really suit it. So I need to move on to a different type of selection tool. I'm just going to go on to the next ones down here below the marquee selection tool on the toolbar, and they are a group of lasso tools. So if I just click and hold down to get a sub-menu out here, I can see three different lasso tools here. The first one is just the lasso tool, plain. The second one is a polygonal lasso tool, and the third one is a magnetic lasso tool. So let's take them one at a time. Firstly, the most basic type of lasso tool. First, just notice the type of icon that my mouse changes into when I hover over my image. I can see it's that type of lasso that a cowboy would use to wrangle up the different cows on the ranches in old western films. But the key thing here is what happens when I click and drag is the lasso tool follows the track of my mouse. So I can be quite delicate, or as delicate as I can be, when I'm moving around, and we can see where this thread of selection is coming from. It's coming from that little comma at the bottom of the icon, and that can be quite important when you're trying to do some very fine work to know where exactly is the actual web of selection coming from. And I can see I can just move around, and eventually I'll move back to what we call the origin of the selection. That is where I started. And as soon as I get back to that area, if I let go, it just finishes off a selection for me. I've got my marching black ant lines around the perimeter of that selection as well, and just like we've seen before in the previous tutorial, we can deselect that by going Command and D or Control D on a PC. And we can move and just create any other type of lasso selection that we want either. Now, the lasso tool, the basic lasso tool, it's interesting that I don't have to go back to the origin if I don't want to. For instance, if I make a selection and I come over here, and if I just let go at this stage, it's just going to give me a straight line back to the origin of my selection, and I'll be left with an overall fully formed selection. So that's the lasso tool. Let's look at a more advanced type of lasso tool, which is the polygonal lasso tool. So this is I click to get an origin, and I can see there, as soon as I'm over the origin with the polygonal lasso tool, I see a little O beside my cursor icon on the mouse. And what the polygonal lasso tool is, well, a polygon is a type of shape, a many-sided shape, and that's exactly what I get here. I get a much more straight edge, straight line perimeter of my selection. So it's making a straight line shape with as many different sides as I want, depending on where I click. Every time I click, it puts a kink or a corner in my shape, and I just get another side. If I move back to the origin, we can see a little O pop up again on my mouse cursor, and that means I can just click once and it will close off the selection. I get my marching black ant lines, and it's a selection just like any other. Again, if I actually start clicking and moving down, clicking again every single time that I want a different corner to get a new edge, but if I double click when I'm away from my origin, that will give me a straight line back to the origin, and that will close off the selection. That's the polygonal lasso tool, very good for straight lines, straight edged shapes. And then the last lasso tool, I'm going to go over here to the lasso area in my toolbox, and I'm going to click and hold down, and I'm going to go for the last one, the magnetic lasso tool. And again, I get a different type of mouse icon here, or mouse cursor. We can see that it's got a little horseshoe magnet up at the top, so that's how I can tell it apart from the others. I'm going to deselect what I've done before by going Command and D. And then what the magnetic lasso tool does, it's very unusual, or quite a lot different from the others. What it does is it hugs to areas of high contrast in my image. So for instance, I've got an area here just along the side of the leaf of this plant here. I've got a very dark green in this area and a very light kind of fawn beige over at this side. So again, keeping in mind that my comma at the bottom of the mouse icon is where the web starts being trailed from, I'm going to hover that end of that comma over that area of high contrast. I'm just going to click once, and that puts in an anchor point in that area. And every so often I'm going to move along that line because I want to select this leaf. And when I get to a particular area where I have to turn and change direction, I put another anchor point. But basically what the magnetic lasso tool is, it magnets itself or attracts itself to this area of high contrast, and it will follow along that area. And I'm just clicking every so often so that it can keep track. And I'm just following along the area nice and easily. And every so often I put in an anchor point, so Photoshop doesn't have to do too much work to try and figure out exactly where the line is. But the magnetic lasso tool in general takes a reasonable amount of time to get a proper selection for it. What would happen if I didn't do any anchor points? Well, you can see it would probably follow along, but every so often I might get a jump that would jump away from the area of high contrast. It's not doing it here, but wait till I get to a corner maybe. And those anchor points that are coming in at the moment, I'm not clicking. It actually puts in those anchor points automatically itself. So it's behaving quite well here at the moment. And we can see here it's tracing around, and again I'm just moving my mouse. I'm just roughly moving my mouse around this area, and magnetic lasso tool is doing all of the work for me. It's hugging to that area of high contrast because it knows anywhere where that green line is the edge of the leaf. Move it down here. Now this is quite fine kind of work, especially when we get in around here. If I had lots of time, I'd go in and fill up all of those small little areas where the kind of leaves are quite small. Now at this stage I'm getting to an area where the contrast isn't as much. I'm going to go along the table here, and let's say if I go up this pepper mill here, or salt mill, we can see here if I don't put in any anchor points, Photoshop starts to lose exactly where the edge of the pepper mill is because the contrast isn't as high. So this is an area where I'm going to click and put in some of my own anchor points to help Photoshop along. Now, I eventually want to go back and get back to my origin, which was way over at the other side of the plant. If I had time, I'd still keep going around the area that I wanted to select it. But at any stage, if I want to stop in the middle of a magnetic lasso tool and just close off the selection, if I just double click, just like I did do with the Polygonal Lasso tool as well, it will close off that selection. Now, that may look as if I haven't done a huge amount here, that maybe I need to deselect and go again. But in fact, that is a useful selection. And we'll see later with selection modes, I can add on to this selection here and take some things away. So generally with magnetic lasso tools, I generally find it's good to do maybe half of an intricate object first of all, get that selection, get it right, get it in a way that I'm happy with it, and then add on to it using these selection modes, which we'll see in the next tutorial. But that's the magnetic lasso tool. It takes a little bit of practice. Don't lose patience with it. Yeah, just practice it up over a few different days, and eventually you'll get quite comfortable with it.